I had no idea where to start. When I was a young associate at Sidley Austin, a partner, before leaving town for another transaction, came into my office and assigned to me drafting pledge agreements for a financial transaction for subsidiaries in Spain, France, Italy, Australia, Mexico, and several other countries. I was practicing law at a time when law firms didn't have computers, so there was no email. What was I going to do? I went from office to office asking if anybody had ever drafted a pledge agreement from these other countries or knew anything about law in other countries. Finally, I got to a partner who reached into her filing cabinet and pulled out a list of local counsel from different countries and said that I could reach out to them to get some help. This was my first encounter with knowledge management, or should I say the lack of knowledge management at a law firm. Welcome to today's webinar, From Archive to AI, the Evolution of KM. And I have a fantastic panel to talk about the evolution of KM. These are people that I've learned about KM from. So I want to jump right in. And since I want most of the time to focus on where we are today and the future, I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves kind of like I did, but introduce yourself, but also talk about the state of knowledge management when you started. So Meredith, let's start with you.
Sure, and man, I'm going to age myself rapidly in about 2 seconds. So when I started, I was a young lawyer focused on tax and M&A work, and at the same time, at about 3 years in, I was asked to start re-looking at the intellectual property of my organization, and this is 2 years ago. And as I was doing that, what I realized very clearly that knowledge management did not exist. It is not a term that anyone had used within the organization. It was not even on the lips of anyone in leadership as far as what this was. It was simply a conversation around how are we tracking information of the firm. And this is about 20 years ago is what we're talking about. And so I was the first person within that organization to have any kind of title associated with knowledge management. Not even in the first few years when I moved over into the operational side of that space, it was first called a technology associate. That was the first kind of purview in that. Over the course of the next 3 years, it became knowledge management attorney, and then of course a CKO. So that was my initial start with knowledge management. As I was a young lawyer trying to do things on my own, trying to find information, questioning why we didn't have it. Then because I was raising my hand and asking why we didn't have stuff, it was, hey, can you fix it? And that then became the story of my existence. And so I started as an M&A tax lawyer, moved into knowledge management, and then moved into overall operations. And my current role is the Chief Legal Operations Officer with Gibson Dunn, sitting in New York City. I also spent time as the president of ILTA, which you're all very familiar with as well. So that's a little bit about me and a little bit about where I began.
Perfect. Patrick, let's go to you next.
Well, turns out my story is very similar to Meredith's. You could replace tax and M&A with litigation, and it's very, very similar. I was a practicing litigator for about 8 years, and just became very frustrated with it. You know, again, this also right around 20 years ago, which is crazy to think about, when I made the switch from practicing to what I thought I invented, by the way. That's how little of KM was going on at the time. You know, it's the folks on this call and a few others who have been around for longer as well, but it wasn't even on radars, right? So I literally came up with a job description to help myself with my own frustrations. And then I thought, hey, if I'm feeling these frustrations in the practice of law, others in my firm must as well. Maybe I can help everybody reduce their frustration. And, you know, again, it was quite a while ago, so we didn't have the tools and technologies and procedures and structures and, quite frankly, the guidance that we've all had over the last 20 years from people like you see on this call and others to help us go forward. So we were kind of making it up as we went along, and it was everything. It was technology, it was knowledge management, library, information management. They threw everything into the job description that I created. Fast forward a number of years, and I had different roles like CKO and Chief Innovation Officer at a few different firms. And about 2.5 years ago, I decided to go out on my own, and now I'm an independent consultant. My organization is called Inspire KM, and I also work with Joshua on a conference that we're doing again this year in October. So we're very excited about that as well.
Perfect. Cindy, I know you, but maybe not everybody does, but I don't know your origin story, so this will be fun.
Sure. Well, I came up through the technology way into KM, I guess, that I was working in a law firm in DC that basically started with a single office, about 400 lawyers. And we were getting to the point where lawyers were coming to me to find a technical solution to what ultimately ended up being knowledge management problems, right? They were sitting in negotiations opposite the same vendors over and over again, and they really wanted to know, this vendor says they can't agree to this provision, but we know that they have before, for one of our other clients. And so we really started to build technology that would help our lawyers solve these problems. And eventually I proposed that we create an actual knowledge management initiative where we would go to different practices and say, what are the biggest pain points? What problems are you trying to solve? What questions are you asking over and over again? And that turned out to be very, very successful at that firm, technology enabled for sure, but learned a lot about the importance of people and process in both of those, in all of those kinds of initiatives. So I've had a wide-ranging career, both in technology, as a director of knowledge management for firms of different sizes, global firms, and spent some time with a technology vendor. And then I'm now the Chief Data and Innovation Officer at Frost Brown Todd, a Midwestern firm, about 600 lawyers, national now, I should say. We have offices from coast to coast.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Joshua Fireman, even though it says very solid.
All right. I'm going to give a two-part origin story, and one part even Meredith, Patrick, and Cindy don't know. So when I was in law school in the early 90s at McGill, the tradition was that you would pass down course summaries from year to year. So second years give their first years the course summary. We would walk down the hill to the copy center, make a photocopy of it, and then use that to build up the next year's course summary. And around 92, we had a computer lab in the faculty, which, by the way, is a room filled with computers, because we did not have computers in our homes and there were no laptops. And so we were just like, this is stupid. I hate walking down to the copy center. Why don't we put this stuff in the computer? And so we put in the faculty's computer network. And then we made the decision to share those widely that year. So not for the subsequent year, but to our classmates. So we started doing this, and we used the computer network for that. I discovered about 7 years ago, when I went back to McGill, that freaking bank still exists and is actually administered every year by a student. It's a permanent role in the faculty. They have no idea where it came from, because it was eons ago, right? And we had no idea that what we were doing was creating a knowledge bank that was going to grow year over year, and we did. So fast forward to 2000, and I was in house counsel. The corporation I was working with was going to dissolve into its operating companies. I had a choice of becoming a lawyer again, which was horrifying to me, did not suit my personality or inclinations, or to go and join McCarthy Tetro in Toronto, which at the time was launching a program around knowledge management, which I knew absolutely butkiss about. So we show up at McCarthy's, we have no idea what we're doing, and we went around, and what we ended up developing was what we would call today an experience management system, where we captured all of the main deals and cases in the firm, the dollar amounts, who the parties opposite were, key documents, and built this KM system. And from there, I went into consulting and ultimately founded Fireman and Company a dozen years ago, which is now a part of Epic more broadly. And I continue to work with, fortunately, many of the most innovative law firms in the world with respect to knowledge management and other initiatives. But that's the origin story. It goes all the way back to the 90s. Not quite as old as Barry, but close, close.
Well, it's fun to look back, but what I want to do now is bring us to today and start looking forward. So for each of the topics, really they're going to be two-part questions, but I'll ask each of you to address, which is where are things today and looking forward at trends. So let's start with our first topic around where does KM have the biggest impact? Patrick, I'll start with you. Talk a little bit about how KM has helped firms you've been with and also firms perhaps you're working with. And then maybe what do you see looking forward? And I'll ask each of you that, but Patrick, let's start with you.
Yeah, thanks. So generally speaking, of course, when you're talking about KM, there's some fundamental concepts, right? We're talking about increasing, the quality, consistency, and efficiency of work product, right? The practice of law, also the business of law, which I think is very, very important. And I think some people sort of miss. They focus on how do we help the lawyers do their work, as opposed to how do we help the firm or organization be a better business. I think that's very, very important. And we can get into sort of the details of KM about capturing and organizing content, and the details of how you can go about connecting your colleagues for experience and expertise location, these types of things. But I think probably one of the most important aspects, I always focus on the end user, so to speak, right? The legal professional, the lawyer, or the whoever it is, right? Whoever we're talking about that's doing the work or trying to win new business. I think one of the most important things that people don't focus on is that end user experience. And for them, it's the access to the content or the people, and it's how can they apply effectively the content so they can do better work and create more business, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's super, super important. But I think what's also very important, and I think this is sort of a longer term outcome of an effective KM program, is changing the mindset of people within your organization. And I've seen this a number of times, and it's a slow burn, so to speak. It's something that happens through experience. When your lawyers, for example, at your law firm, when you deliver to them something that really helps them, whether it's a practice-oriented thing or a business-oriented thing, the light bulbs go off. They're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize we could do something like this. I didn't realize we have these tools and technologies, and I didn't realize you put these processes in place. I didn't realize you had this great team of people who have, some are former practicing lawyers, some are great technologists, et cetera. I didn't realize we had this. Now that I know, I'm going to be your best friend, or sometimes your worst nightmare, because I'm going to be contacting you all the time for help on these things. So I think that's something that's sort of it's not an unintended consequence. It's definitely intended, but it's something that sort of a lot of people don't think about, is that mindset change that the end users, the lawyers and other legal professionals experience. And I think that's great.
Organic. Cindy, same question, impact today and where you see it going.
Sure. Well, I will say that Frost Brown Todd specifically created a data and innovation department just over 2 years ago, and they very intentionally did not call it knowledge management. Although there is a lot of knowledge management happening, and the firm never had any formal knowledge management before, you know, there's certainly a lot of aspects of knowledge management. So I think that you know, how we've helped over the last few years is just sort of putting the infrastructure in place for the firm to better understand the work that we do, who's doing the work, you know, our clients, their industries, so that we can make sure that we're pulling together industry solutions that meet their needs. And we're helping the firm, of course, be more efficient, really supporting the growth of the firm. When you have a firm that maybe grew up in a couple of smaller cities and now all of a sudden is nationwide, there's just no way that you can know the 100 lawyers that joined our firm last year and, you know, their expertise and what they can offer. So it's really been a fun journey, right? Being able to start something from scratch is a really unique opportunity. But I think the main thing that we've had the biggest impact on, it goes back to something Patrick said about mindset, right? Now we're talking a lot about making data-driven decisions and having the kind of information that we need to support those decisions. Whereas before, people were saying, well, I think this might be where we have a lot of industry expertise. Now I can give you the financial impact of every combination of industry and practice and matter type at our firm. So we can make, you know, really much stronger decisions. And that kind of data is available for all kinds of technologies, which I'm sure we're going to talk about.
From intuition to data driven. Yeah. Joshua, thoughts?
Look, I think that Cindy really hit the nail on the head with this one. You know, we were lucky enough to be working with her firm during that process of helping to create the department. And what made it, I think that what has put Cindy in a position where she's achieved so much success is that it flowed out of a firm strategy. So knowledge management in a vacuum, knowledge management is a tough slog uphill. When you can associate it to a firm strategy and to a series of well-defined firm objectives, that's where it succeeds. Because, you know, look, KM in the early days, right? Remember, the evolution of KM is we did precedents, right? We worked on models, we enable access to precedents. It was really that core, almost, you know, evolving out of the library function, right, of knowledge. And Cindy said, I 100% agree that it's data, and data now in the service of measurable, clearly articulated business objectives. Knowledge cannot establish those objectives in a vacuum, and it has to be done with the firm. And those firms that are doing the most interesting work and achieving the biggest successes are the ones that have integrated their knowledge strategy into the overall strategic goals, whether it's with respect to the business of the firm or improving the overall practice of law and the practice workflows connected to that.
Yeah, so it's kind of back to the future. Maybe it's different tools, but the fundamentals are the same. You have to tie it to strategy to make it work. Meredith, anything to add to that?
Just really quickly, I agree with what everyone has said, but I'm gonna sum this up. I sit in a unique role of kind of all of the functions that are supporting the actual practice. And so KM to me is just so critical to making that work. But at a high level, knowledge management can improve efficiency, effectiveness, and at the bottom line, it can improve profit margin. A lot of times we deal with adoption issues as kind of you've heard a little bit around this, and we'll talk about some of the challenges with it. But today, with value-based pricing and really solid knowledge management, you can improve the bottom line of organization tenfold. It's just how you structure this. So what Joshua was saying about being a part of the strategic elements, making it a part data and AI, but getting to the core elements of really delivering information to the right people at the right time is what Patrick was saying. Ultimately, we deliver efficiency, we deliver effectiveness. We're trying to improve that profit margin on every single matter that we bring to the organization. knowledge management, that's what we do, and we do it really, really well.
So from Patrick all the way to Meredith, you all talked about the benefits of KM, from the practice of law to the business of law, how it's going to make things improve efficiency, effectiveness, but also help firm growth and profitability. So it's such a great thing. Joshua, let me start with you. What are the challenges with KM? You know, you want to gain all these benefits, but, you know, talk a bit about, you know, the challenges and both what you're seeing now and maybe looking around the corner, what you see arising in the next few years.
Yeah, two small groups, the other administrative professionals and the lawyers are your two biggest groupings. So, hey, look, you know,
KM would be great without the lawyers, right?
everybody would do it. Look on the firm business side, and this is something that I think we've all experienced to some degree over the last few years, and probably most of the people on this call. We have firmly moved into an era, even before AI, but now particularly with these AI tools that people want to leverage, where we have got to break down the silos and the barriers that exist between departments. And this goes to Cindy's comment about data, but it's not just data, the individual data types. It's the governance, it's decisions around ownership, how it's going to be used, how's that reporting going to work, how do you protect it? This is so it is a level of integration that simply that vastly supersedes any of the monthly meetings that law firm admin groups went through for 20. So part one is really having strong leadership to help to shepherd that level of firm-wide initiative. That's part one. Part two is, again, something that we all pay great attention to now, but remains a significant challenge, is not treating change management as an afterthought, but as the primary component of success to any initiative that we are undertaking, whether it's on the attorney side or on the admin side, but especially on the attorney side. I'll just say one thing since we're on a webinar and it's public. I just want to get this off my chest, okay? I'm sick and tired of hearing people blame the lawyers and claim they're untrainable and they're not willing to change. It's bullshit. If I can just say that out loud, that is not correct. We have simply not put the time and the effort and the resources into the level of analysis and long-term change, monitoring, repositioning, using, and that is because change needs to occupy a position, a preponderant position in how we bring about transformation in law firms, and not simply be the thing we pay for at the end so we can exercise plausible deniability while we blame the lawyers for squandering the firm's investment in what would have otherwise been a really cool initiative. Okay, that's what I have to say.
All right. Well, Cindy, you may not be quite as subtle and understated as Joshua, but do you have any thoughts about the challenges we face with KM?
Well, let me just echo what Joshua said, first of all, because I think we have to, I have always said KM is like politics, it's all local, right? You have to speak to a lawyer in the language that makes sense to them. And, you know, whether they're a tax lawyer or a litigator, they're very, very different, right? They're doing different things, they speak in different ways, they have different motivations, just like we all do. And so you've got to really figure out what those motivations are in order to come up with a change management, you know, tool that makes sense. But the other thing is, we can't, most firms are throwing way too many priorities at the lawyers. They're asking them to do too many things. So, you know, is this yet another initiative, or have you really operationalized it? Which I think is the word maybe that Joshua was saying, right? It's when KM becomes just how we do business, and when data is how we do business as opposed to a separate initiative within the firm, then you can say, you know, that you've achieved success. And that's where the challenge really is trying to get people again into that mindset of understanding and having the leadership to have it be a focus, but built into things that you're already doing as a firm. It's a part of every plan. It's a part of every initiative.
Yeah, this is echoing back to the notion of tying it to the firm's strategy and not having it be something separate.
Yeah.
That's right.
Meredith.
Agree with what they're talking about here. What has always been one of the most critical challenges of knowledge management is adoption. And that it hasn't that fear of something new and, oh my God, you're taking my job, and oh my God, that's something I have billed time for, is not going. It's only because, okay? And that 20 years ago, when we were doing forms libraries, it was, wait a minute, I start from scratch every time. I needed to bill all of that time. How am I going to do that? Today, the conversation is, oh my God, that AI is performing draft one, which is what a first-year associate is typically billed for. The conversation remains. It is a fear of that adoption and what that is going to do to their position. We see that not only to the lawyer side, but on the professional side now, especially with a lot of the AI. The hardest aspect goes to what Cindy was talking about. Law firms are run by one, are run by many. And you know, I use this example often in that all partners of the organization of a law firm, it's kind of like managing the United Nations, where every partner assumes that they are the superpower. They're the US, they're the China, they're whatever. Sometimes you're just Poland, and they don't really realize that sometimes they're just Poland. And you need to speak to them as if they are a superpower, and you have to convince them. A lot of times what we have to do when we engage is exactly what others are already talking about. We have to engage to inform, but we have to engage to influence. Why is this important to you? Why does this matter to you? What is this going to add to your back pocket? What is this going to do for the client? And really, when we go in to engage with our individuals, understanding where we're coming from is very critical, because no two audiences are the same. Understanding if they're an associate, what their fears are, if they're a partner, what fears are, if they're sitting in our finance department, what their fears are, their fears. And that's a psychological conversation that you're really having. The fear, figure out how you support the overcoming that fear, and help them understand how you can really help them do their job better. That's ultimately what we have to do. But it is a continued conversation of that fear, remove it to get to improved adoption. And that will not go away, especially with the introduction of all of the AI we face today.
But we're going to have to come back to that. That's interesting, because some people think it's somehow magically going to make those types of adoption problems go away. So we'll put a pin in that. Patrick, your perspective of the challenges and difficulties of KM.
Yeah, well, first of all, obviously agree with everything that has been said already. One of the things I've noticed when I was at law firms is you sort of, when you're new, you have this period of like everybody listens to you and they're like, oh my God, that's amazing. I can't believe the profound things you're telling us. It's going to change everything. And then about 6 months later, it's like, okay, whatever. I call it the new person syndrome, right? Anyway, so I say that because one of the things I like to do is basically quote other people, and namely, people in other industries as well. So to the points that have been made before, for example, Joshua and Meredith's points about change management and adoption, obviously I agree with those points. And the person who struck me in that construct or in that concept is Steve Jobs has the famous saying that you have to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology, not the other way around and try to figure out the technology and figure out how to sell it. So that's kind of to Joshua's point, right? It's not the lawyers that are the problem. It's not the customers that are the problem. It's you. You've got the wrong technology, you got the wrong tool, you got the wrong whatever. You're selling to them. They are the customer. If they're not buying it, they're not buying it. And adoption is the same way. If they're not adopting what you're putting out there, you're not doing it right. So you got to do it right. And then to Cindy's point about prioritization, I don't know who said this. Maybe I said it. I'm sure I didn't. I said it, but someone else said it. Is we can do anything, but we can't do everything. And this was a mantra that I repeated multiple times at all of my law firm gigs, because that's what happens, right? To Cindy, everyone, and to Meredith's point too, you've got 1 million bosses, maybe just 1,000, not 1 million, but you got 1,000 bosses. They're all coming at you, and the better you do, the more these people want you to do. So it's a real problem. So you have to temper that, and you say, hey, I'd love to help you. Can you give me more resources? Can you give me more people? Can we get the right technology, et cetera, et cetera? And then the final thing I'd say is we really, to the original question, one of the most challenging things is we really need to understand our problem. It's not the need, it's not the want, it's the need. Really understand the problem. And my favorite anecdote from this comes from Jeff Bezos, right? Amazon. He's touring one of the warehouses, and he's pointing out how clean and tidy and dirt-free the warehouses are. And there's a Kaizen expert, an efficiency expert with him. And the expert says, that's very impressive, but why are you cleaning? Why don't you eliminate the source of the dirt, right? That's the problem. It's not how well you clean and how well you do this. It's the dirt origin is the problem. So I think people need to think about things a little bit differently sometimes, and come at it from a different perspective. And that can be all the difference when it comes to figuring out what's really difficult and what you can accomplish.
So we've talked about the impact, the benefit, and the challenges. And as we're talking about it, you talk about lawyers adopting technology, we talked about data. So let's turn to technology. And Cindy, I'm going to start with you because I first met you when you were, like me, a customer of a certain product, and then you were at the technology side, and then now you're again at a law firm working with technology, not even calling it KM. You're talking about data. Where does technology have the biggest impact today and solve the biggest problems? And, what do we see is right at the edge and looking forward? What are the trends that we should be looking at with technology?
Well, far be it for me to introduce the topic of generative AI, but of course, that's what's on our minds today. That's what we are all looking forward in the future, what we're going to have to look at having the biggest impact. But I would say that to Patrick's point, it's really understanding the need and the problems that we're trying to solve with that technology. What technology done well helps lawyers solve are almost always workflow problems or integration. Like they feel like they have too many different systems to go to either find information or to just do their work, to just get the work done, right? And what they're looking for is a seamless experience like they have in some of the most simple technologies that are out there. They're looking for a simple user experience to solve a problem without having to go to multiple technologies or multiple places to get there, right? Does Gen AI help us solve that problem? I think, it certainly will have a big impact in that problem, but it's a little bit less about the AI itself and a little bit more about how users interact with it. Because I've seen some tools, obviously we're working with Gen AI tools, and the biggest problem that I see with them right now is the user interface and the workflow that is connected to those tools.
Yeah, Meredith, she may have already answered the question. I was going to come back to your point when you were talking about the challenges of saying, hey, these challenges we've seen in the past are not going away. In fact, maybe with Gen AI. What were you meaning?
I can speak to that. I always look at every person's reaction to a piece of technology or an initiative is it's usually psychological based. And I want to understand why. And when you dig into that, there's usually an element of fear of change is really what that equals to. So regardless of how toxic something may be, everyone has to go through a grieving process regardless of how fast that process maybe. Some people can get over it in an hour, some in a year, but there's no two people who are the same in that. Technology plays a major role in knowledge management. It always has played a major role in knowledge management. Even if you go back to the origins of that, at the origins, know-how became knowledge management, but then it was, how do we even do it better? How do we even do it better? And technology has always been an element of that. What we fail to do at times, though, is we fail to understand that technology cannot solve all problems. And just because we can build it does not mean that we should build it. And there's aspects to that we have to pay attention to. So when you're thinking of technology and what to do, it's usually the last 10% of the solution to whatever problem is either desired or needed to be solved. And that means that you've got to look at the people involved, the processes involved, the data involved, and the technology involved, and then come to a holistic solution. If you simply try to apply fantastic, shiny technology to a very big human problem, it will still be a human problem that's just shinier and just faster problems. So you have to make certain that you understand the interplay of the technology with the human, with the process. I'm going through this right now. I was meeting with a large team yesterday and talking about the fact that we need this large form. And I said, I hear you, but no, we don't. We actually need to go through our processes and solve for the process problems first before we introduce something new and shiny that no one's going to utilize if the process is still broken. And I think that's very critical, especially as we move forward with the AI. Everyone is making that assumption that, oh my God, the ChatGPTs of the world are going to solve so many problems, but that is not relevant at all stages. There's a number of studies right now from McKinsey and TR and others that will talk about the fact that yes, 80% of law firm now have a digital transformation strategy, or it is a segment of their larger strategy. However, when you dig into that, only 50% of leaders think that AI should be used to replace certain legal functions. So there's still some hesitancy, even in 2 years down the ranks, of having that GPT. Then we dig into some of those studies further, have associates being filled because they're not sure. They want the partners want them to use those tools. So everything goes back to that initial statement I said of the fear of using it. Are we using it correctly? And so technology plays a major element of that. We have to harness it correctly, and we have to make certain that we're educating the right purposes to use it when. That user interfaces, to Cindy's point, are getting better. They're not great. They're getting better. That's all.
I'll just say I had 2 conversations yesterday that were exactly what Meredith was talking about, right? One of them, quite frankly, was with summer associates who some might assume, I often hear, for 25 years I've heard, well, wait until the younger lawyers come along and then everything will change because they'll just magically adopt technology. I had conversations with summer associates who said, I'm afraid that this technology is going to take away my career path that I've chosen. I've just spent 3 years in law school, and I'm afraid it's going to take away my job. That's what's in the front of their minds right now. And the other one was about, adding a technology and changing some things. And it was just like, yes, but we have to understand our process first. And we also need to say, is this the best process? Do we have the right resources doing the right things? And, it's great to add technology to that, but how should, if we had to start over tomorrow, how would we design this process? It might look very, very different. So yes, to all of that.
Patrick, you want to add on to the impact of technology, both today and what you're seeing in the future?
Yeah. I think all of us on this call take part in a lot of sort of group meetings and things like that with folks at various firms. And I think, among those meetings, because they're kind of private and we commiserate. But I don't think a lot of people want to say this type of thing publicly. I'll say it because I don't have a law firm to report to, but I think one of the problems is overload, right now, right? We all remember information overload and how much we were like crazy about information overload. I think we still have that, but now we have tech tool overload, right? AI, in particular, AI tool overload. I can't tell you how many times in a week, I get an email from a college dropout or a recent college grad who's a computer science genius who read an article or their lawyer told them that they should apply AI to the legal field. And there are so many tools out there. And the good thing and the bad thing is some of them are great and some of them will be amazing. But there's so much coming at us right now. There's so much new stuff, and that's taking up a lot. I know from conversations that one firm I heard recently has a full-time person that just keeps up on the news, external news about AI and AI tools and all that stuff. A full-time person, which I thought was good and impressive. But it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of I was going to say, we're talking about technology, but a lot of times it comes back, as many of you have already said, to the people, right? We need people, and we need time and space to take all of this in, to process it, and try to figure it out. So it's challenging. It's definitely challenging.
So we have a lot of solutions to discrete problems, but those solutions have created kind of a higher level problem, which is how do we put that all together? Joshua, any final thoughts about the impact of technology, both positive and negative, and if you could predict the future, where you think things would be going with technology?
I mean, look, I think that we're in a little bit of a bump where people are really obsessed with watching and examining new tools, and we're going to see a leveling out to. We're going to see two things. We're going to see we will see three things. A certain number of point solutions will emerge that get traction in the market and that solve useful problems. We're going to see existing vendors in the market integrating AI tools into their platforms that also solve problems. And then I think that we're going to see generalist tools evolve a little bit like some other companies in legal have, where they go from being development platforms to, again, offering up business solutions. All that said, right, there's a lot. Look, it's fun. I get it, okay? But all these cool tools, and you can experiment and play, and you're doing R&D. And I really do worry that I'm seeing a lot of financial and resource waste in firms chasing fancy, shiny objects that aren't necessarily tied, I'm going to loop this right back to the beginning, to business problems that actually matter to the firm. And Cindy, I think Cindy, you said a variation on this, which is where does this fit in the overall solution set that's going to deal with people? We're going to have to look at processes, whether it's around governance or data and what have you. And then where does that fit in our solution stack? In terms of where things are going, what my prediction for the future is, I don't think that this bump is going to last forever. I don't think it's going to last much beyond this year before we start to see a rationalization around this. What I believe we are moving toward finally, after years and years, is having the ability to deliver a user experience around the practice of law within firms by consolidating around, so here's my hot take, okay? We're going to consolidate around Microsoft as the user-facing platform that, whether it's through Teams, whether it's through SharePoint, and ultimately, the tools are going to be less important than their contribution to the practice and role-specific workflows that we enable within the firms. That, I think, is where we're all headed. I think that whether we use that expression or not, I think this is the end goal, which is, can we deliver a user experience around the practice of law that moves the technology into the background and delivers outcomes to attorneys to make them better lawyers?
I'm going to ask the next question to any or all of you. So, you've all talked about, although we talked about technology, we talked about KM, it's really boils down to the people, to the lawyers actually adopting these solutions, these tools, these resources. So from a practical standpoint, what have you seen, or what could you imagine if you had a magic wand that would encourage adoption? And you stood up and on the table, Joshua, and said, look, it is not the lawyer's fault. Well,
Say it, Barry.
should we
Use
be
the word.
doing? What's that?
Use the word, Barry. Say it.
Yeah. So what do we do as a KM professional to encourage adoption of our solutions, of what we're offering?
I'll start. And this is probably the best piece of advice someone gave to me years ago, and I encourage any knowledge professional to think about this. You have to continuously teach, and you have to continuously listen. You are not doing items, you're building things in a vacuum to not solving the need. You're not. You may be bringing something shiny to them, but you're not actually solving for the business problem that may exist. So I would recommend thinking through continuous, every month, every week, every day engagement in some form or fashion. And engagement can be a one-on-one dialogue. It can be regular conversations with your associate groups. It can be regular conversations with your practice groups. Find ways culturally to engage and to listen to the business problems and the pain points of your lawyers and staff. One, you're going to gain their trust. Two, you're going to build things with them where they feel like they have kind of a part of the process, and they're going to be your kind of navigators into how to gain the additional adoption that you need. But I mean, that's the number one thing that I do. I spend 50% of my time talking to people, listening to people. So
Yeah.
I can understand the business problem that we have, so that I can the right team to bear, or the right systems to bear, or the right whatever to bear to solve for that. And that's the number one piece of advice I can give.
Yeah, Meredith, I just want to add one thing. I 100% endorse that. I just want to add one thing. Over the course of my career, I probably worked with about 2/3 of the AmLaw 100 at this point. I still, to this day, sit in on focus group meetings around projects, listening to how lawyers and other professionals practice law. And after almost 25 years of doing this, I am still learning. I'm still learning the differences between firms and practices and regions and roles and the evolving workflows that matter here. And so I want to endorse what Meredith said, but also say there is no one, to me, and this still happens, where someone goes, oh, you don't need to talk to lawyers. I know what they need. I know my firm. Yeah. You don't. I don't know. And look, I'm just going to put it out there. I have spoken to thousands and thousands of lawyers over the years, and I don't know until I listen to them, as Meredith said, what it is that's ultimately going to help to move that needle and what they're going to respond to. So I just want to give that a resounding endorsement. Yeah. We still walk in the firms where the attorneys have never been spoken to by the people providing solutions to them when they've never asked them what the problems are.
I love that. I mean, Patrick said, repeat what other people say. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, and that's going to be the difference here. Okay, because we're running close to time, we're going to do a lightning round. I'm going to ask each of you, because all of you entered either in the past or even recently with Cindy, creating new titles, new roles in the knowledge management space. So a lightning round, just off the top of your head, one role that you think may be going away, or one role that will be increasing or maybe even creating in the future that hasn't existed. Patrick, I'll start with you. Thoughts?
Oh man, I'll just say there are so many new titles out there that we're seeing. And I think the one, and I'm not crazy about this, but the add-on title, it's blank and AI officer, right? It's right. And I'm not criticizing anyone that's doing this or anybody that has this title, but I suspect that we are going to enter into a I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to call this, but right now I'm calling it the post-AI era. We're not there yet. Clearly, we are smack in the middle of AI. I think we're going to be in a post-AI era, and those titles are going to drop off because it's going to be everywhere. It's going to be baked into everything. It's not going to be a thing. As Scott Rexhoffen says, we no longer have chief electricity officers, right? I think he said something like that before.
It's ubiquitous.
That's my hot take. It's going to take a few years, but yeah.
Joshua, your thoughts?
Yeah, we're seeing titles these days are either to indicate an expansion of responsibilities. This is where we're seeing the AI piece added in. Or I'll be honest, they're to attract the right candidates for more expansive roles.
Yeah.
And I think this is a good thing because what it means, if you look at Cindy or if you look at Meredith, right? Their remits are large and wide and frankly far beyond any traditional definition of knowledge management. Meredith, your responsibilities obviously exceed even that. But at the end of the day, it is a recognition that we've always said this in KM. So now within our little group of KM people, right? We've always said, my God, we're the only group that crosses departments. We're the only ones. Yeah, we have KM initiatives, but at the end of the day, we don't succeed unless we are in close collaboration and partnership with finance, with talent, with HR, with marketing, with InfoGov, with security, with IT, right? And what we're seeing, Patrick, I think maybe I'll throw this one out since we're forecasting the future, right? I think that structuring law firms around strict administrative functions may begin to change around structuring outcomes toward law firms with respect to the outcome-based responsibilities of a management team. And that would be a significant, but I suspect welcome shift with respect to removing the barriers to success in some firms.
I'm just very quickly, I'm just reminded of that expression. People don't want to buy drills, they want to buy holes, right? We've all heard that one before. I think clients don't want to hire lawyers. They want to your point, Joshua, they don't want to hire lawyers. They want the outcome of having hired a lawyer. And I think you're absolutely right there. It matters who does it, but it doesn't matter who does it.
Yeah.
They care today about how we deliver the work versus actually hiring us and that holistic view of the expertise and how we're delivering it than anything else.
Meredith, any other roles that you want to add?
Well, I'm going to pivot questions just a tiny bit. I actually think the knowledge workers in particular are going to play a critical role moving forward in this realm of AI. I think there's not a better suited group of individuals to understand the data, the architecture, how to prompt it, how to eliminate hallucinations than knowledge workers. In particular for the practice areas, some of those lawyers. And I think that's going to be one of the pivotal roles moving forward. I think additional role that's going to come into play is a prompt engineer. And I think those two combined they're going to be talented. That's what I'll say.
Cindy, you could just say your title to answer this question. So if you have anything to add, go ahead, and then I'll have you be the first to. I'll ask the last question up. So any thoughts about titles?
I do. I think that we're still seeing separation between professional development of lawyers, technology trainers, and knowledge and innovation, people who are mostly technology. And I think those are converging. And I think that I hope we see more titles around the word coach that include coach, because companies don't change, people do. And you've got to help people understand how to practice in new and different ways using this technology, sure, but also making sure that it's a process that's efficient and really serves our clients. So that's what I hope to see.
That's interesting because that's kind of how you implement what Joshua says you need, which is what's the outcome, right? And by converging those things, you can get those outcomes.
Yeah.
Last question for all of you, because unfortunately we're almost out of time, but what I want for closing thoughts, Cindy, we'll start with you, what do we do to prepare for things that are coming in the future? In particular, how do we future-proof the knowledge management function? Or if I'm thinking about my career, how do I prepare for what's to come in KM?
I don't think you can ever overinvest in process analysis, sort of understanding processes and how they work and how to, and the other thing I would say is facilitation skills, because all of this, you can have lots of technical skills, but if you can't listen to people, if you don't know how to facilitate one of those focus groups, if you don't know how to negotiate different points of view that are in the room and help people find consensus around how to move forward, then a lot of these initiatives will stall.
I see a lot of head nodding. Patrick, your closing thoughts.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. And I always think of the word empathy, right? And it really goes to what Cindy said and what we've all been saying kind of all through this whole thing. You just need to understand your people, right? You need to talk to them. You need to communicate. You are serving them, and you need to figure out how to serve them effectively. So, yeah, I'm sure I can't say much more than what's been said already.
Joshua?
Look, Cindy nailed it. Process improvement got a dirty name for a while in law firms because it was perceived as a very academic exercise that was not really. The problem was it happened in a vacuum and wasn't tied to the execution end that has to accompany it. I think process improvement and process mapping today is actually the secret sauce to effective change management and adoption, and is critical to developing the long-term adoption plans the firms are going to need as we move forward. So I'm super glad that you raised that, Cindy, because it doesn't get spoken of enough these days. But I think that there's a next wave of what I'll just call practical process improvement that's going to have a material impact on law firms' ability to derive value from all the initiatives that we've talked about.
Meredith, final thoughts.
So, when I hear people today, I look for empathetic leaders, but I look for people who are nimble and adaptable. The adaptability intelligence of a person has to be very high, meaning what you're doing today may not be what you're doing a year from now. And I think that the only constant to see in our role is change. And the only constant we're going to see in our law firms is change. We need to that we are empathetic to our people, but we also need to make certain that we're resilient and we can adapt to the changes in order to adapt those to the larger firm.
Well, I want to thank this panel. What was really interesting about this, and to echo a bit of what Meredith just said, which is it's really refreshing to hear, even though we don't know. I mean, we're going to fast forward 5 years and look back and realize we're living through these dramatic changes. But what the four of you were able to do is talk about the core principles that don't change in order for KM to really make a difference at a law firm. So I think it's a great roadmap for those of us who are passionate about making a difference at our firm. So thank all of you for participating, and thank you, those of you who are listening as well. Take care all. Bye.
Thanks, Barry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Thanks, everybody.